Greetings, friends. Welcome to the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. I'm so thrilled to be here with you guys this week. I hope that you are just making it happen out there, that you've been gritty, that you've been able to stick to your routines, and that you're impacting student life if you're in education. I just pray that all things are going well with you and your family. With that said, I'm going to transition us into some announcements. So first things first. The Gritty podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on Swain Grow Media channel, hosted by Precious Swain on Firestick. And also, you can tune in on various social media platforms to see it as well. And thanks for your support. I want to also remind you guys of my social media handles if you're wanting to follow me. We follow me at Facebook on Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And my TikTok channel is Dr. India White. I also want to invite you to check me out on the website www.india-white.com for books, blogs, and or to schedule me for your next speaking event or coaching event. I'm really looking forward to a lot of upcoming events that I have going on with many of you across this nation. Thank you for trusting me in your conferences and your platforms and in your schools. I'm super excited. I know some of them. I've got great numeracy workshops coming up next week in California, many different districts, and also a CMC Central Conference, Bakersfield, California. I'll be there joining you guys for that. So I'm super excited. I'm ready to embrace the love. I'm ready to just have a good time with you guys. Thank you so much. Coming from Florida, it's going to be a wonderful time. So with that said, to remind you that if you're wanting to be featured on the Let's Get Gritty podcast, to send me an email with your photo and your bio to india.white.123@gmail.com, and we will get you squared away. Now, let's get started with our show. I'm super excited. I wanted to talk to you guys today about students. We're going to focus on empowering student voice. We'll talk about different methods to do that, because I think more than anything, not only do we need student engagements, but we need student input where students feel empowered. They feel like their voice matters and they're able to strengthen their voice. They talk about there's like a hog, or like the one student that like hogs all the time, and there's the other student that just is a log, or they don't really contribute much. So in order to avoid having like a hog log type of experience, it's imperative that we do what we can to empower student voice, and to make sure that students aren't hiding away in the corner because they're intimidated to speak out, or maybe they're really introverted, or maybe they're dealing with anxiety. So how can we assist our students? So I hope that this show today will give you plenty of feedback and nuggets as to how you can help with student voice. I'll be talking about different methods. I have some videos from some experts that we'll play, but I want to share a story first about a moment I remembered empowering a student in the classroom. I believe I was helping out with kindergarten, and this young African-American boy, he was very shy. He had glasses, and I remembered he would barely whisper like his responses. Like he just did not want to contribute. And he was so just so internal, like so introverted, that I had to vibe it out. So I'm going to tell you, teachers and leaders, when you are doing this, it is imperative that you understand that one does not fit all, and you have to cater to the needs of the student, and you have to remember you are serving the student. So with this particular situation, I knew that I couldn't be overbearing and go in like, okay, well, what do you think? Come on. I need to hear you. Come on. Let's I had to take my time. I had to be very loving and compassionate towards the baby. And then finally, he got comfortable enough to hear himself. Now, listen, some students have never even heard themselves express themselves. And some students will say, oh, gosh, I don't sound good. I sound like I'm just stupid, or I just sound humiliating. And I just embarrassed myself. I don't know what I'm talking about. You've got students with, various languages who are amazing. To be able to juggle more than one language is just phenomenal all in itself. And so you have students that are multilinguistic who are among us who they're trying to process, how do I say that from my native tongue, right, to English? And how do I use it in the right format so I don't sound weird? And is my accent, going to be acceptable among my colleagues or among my peers? So I can recall trying to speak Spanish. I speak some Spanish, un poquito, right? But I would not say I'm like this, where I would like to be, like a top-notch expert where I could like travel and do all this stuff, but I can speak it. And I remembered I was at the store and I was talking to a man and he just looked at me like, I don't speak English. And I was trying to buy an avocado. Go avocados. And I remembered he just was like, no habla inglés. Like, he's like, un momento. And he was like getting out his phone. He was going to do Google Translate, excuse me. And long story short, I was able to tell him, listen, I forgot to get something. Can I leave my cart here and go back and buy an avocado? And so we were able to work it out. We were successful. But I'm sharing that because in the process of me hearing myself talk about buying, like comprando, right, an avocado, and I'm like talking, and I'm like, am I rolling my R right? Am I saying it? Am I saying and translating everything right so I don't sound weird to this guy? So I can imagine if I had that one incident trying to buy an avocado, all I was saying was, listen, I left my cart here, go back and get an avocado and come back. And with that one simple phrase, I was like having some anxiety and I was kind of unsure, like, am I saying everything right? I mean, yeah, it worked out. But at the same time, what about our students? How do they feel when we're asking them to explain, how did you find the solutions using the quadratic formula? Go for it. Yeah, English only. So you're going to have situations where students are going to decide to pass on that one. Even though they might understand the math, they're going to pass on certain things because they're conscious about how they sound. And they're trying to also protect their dignity among their peers. So we've got to learn how to connect and empower student voice in a way that vulnerability piece, students can be vulnerable and feel safe in our classes and feel like they can trust expressing themselves when they are among us and are among their peers. So I wanted to share a little, this woman is, and this is actually written by Sean Andres. It's talking about student-centered learning, and it's titled 10 Ways to Encourage Student Voice. And so it's really neat. He talks about personalized competency-based learning should be student-centered. Okay, so that's the first thing. It should be student-centered, and student voice is a large part of that. It leads to student agency and leadership. So if you're wondering why, because you're wanting that student agency, you're wanting student leadership so that these students can evolve into independent thinkers. They have to become self-advocates for their learning process as well. So this woman here, she's an expert, and she's talking about humanizing questions to make it relevant.
So many of us who have mixed race or mixed ancestry have at one point or another encountered the question, what are you? Mm-hmm. And I hope that we can move from what are you to how do you identify, or what groups do you identify with? Mm-hmm. Like a multiplicity or a plurality of identities. What languages do you speak? What places do you call home? Who is your family? Those are questions that I think are more inviting than what are you?
So I thought this was pretty powerful. And the reason why is because what she's saying here is it's not enough to focus on the math or to focus on the technology and to say, oh, this is what we have in place to empower students and to empower student voice. What she's saying is we cannot skip over the elephant in the room, which is that relevancy of making the math relevant, making their culture relevant to the topic at hand. So when she was saying, what languages do you speak? Where are you from? Like, what places do you call home? This really opens up the discussion to where that student feels like you've tapped them. Like, yes, you are valuable. Your experiences matter. you're cared for, you belong here, and I want to celebrate and uplift your uniqueness. So with that said, I thought that was very interesting that she went into that. They also provided other tips. So I'm going to display for you these tips. Tips for empowering student voice. She said, ask, who are you? The next one, encouraging under-engaged voices. So if you've got the student that is, the one in a demographic group, they're the minority in the classroom setting, whatever that is, or maybe they have a different um, social environment that they are coming from. Maybe they are just, their experience is a little bit different than the status quo in the classroom. Then you want to encourage those under-engaged voices to be involved. And there's some ways to do this. So what you can do is you can make it to where you're not putting a lot of attention on students so that they feel like they're being targeted or they're being humiliated or mocked. And a clever way to do this, if you use whiteboards, you can have students to answer by writing their responses on the whiteboard, and then you can hold up those responses, and then you can point to the responses in the room and kind of share out all of the answers, including that student's. Or you can celebrate and highlight that student's voice. So you can say, "Oh wow, look, I think that's fabulous what student A say. Let's expound on this. Let's elaborate on this. I think this is great." And then you support that. You build a culture where everyone understands that you support and you celebrate that learner and you celebrate their thoughts. And so those are some things that you can do. I can go on and on. I'm going to go to the tip 3. So tip 3 says that you can appreciate and lift underrepresented voices. So I think this is wonderful. And there are many opportunities that you can do this in various like project-based learning situations. So for instance, if you're doing Pi Day, which many of you will be experiencing that in a couple of weeks, what are you going to do to highlight culture or to highlight, just various upbringing and cultural dishes? And I've talked about this on the show before. You can have students bring in a cultural dish and just make sure they use a circular item or so that they can hold whatever the item is, whatever the food is that they're bringing in for the class, whether that's soup, whether that's a cake, whether that's, pasta, whatever it is that they celebrate in their culture, allow them to still do the math, but still celebrate their culture and give them that voice, give them that space, give them the seat on the stage where they're able to shine in the classroom and to talk about their culture and how they were able to use that in this particular math project. I really hope you guys are going to do some Pi Day projects, by the way. Anyway, all right. So now let's go to tip 4. So tip 4 says, make lessons personally relevant. Again, making lessons personally relevant. We just spoke about, doing a project-based learning. So in your lessons, so making it personally relevant. One cool way you can do this is if the students have like a favorite athlete or like a social media account that, actually, if they're allowed to be on social media, if they have, a particular social media that they like or that they, can talk with their peers with, or if they have a particular sport they're involved with, then you can write out problems on the board to match what's going on in their life. So for instance, if you want to talk about TikTok and say, I noticed that Josh and Ashley were on TikTok for 20 minutes. How much longer were they on TikTok than Sarah and, Steven or something like that? You can create problems like that. And even in that simple problem that I just made up, even though there's so much that you can add to that particular problem, you can change out the names of the people that were listed within the text or within the problem to the names of students in your classroom, making sure that it's something that, of course, the problem's like uplifting and that maybe it's like funny or something really cool. It'll really contribute to the learning environment and get a couple of chuckles in there. It'll really perk them up. They'll be like, oh my gosh, like the teacher said my name. Oh my gosh, my name's on the board for bell work. Oh my goodness, my name's on the board. One of the 4 problems for bell work, or, whatever it is, whatever your system is. So those are some ways that you can make it personally relevant for students. Another thing you can do here for tip 5, it says give kids more time for processing. There's nothing wrong with wait time, but it does feel like you're doing something wrong because you're just sitting there and you're like, oh goodness. Like you're watching the clock, you can hear the dial move, and you're like, oh, I should probably say something, or I should probably give them the answer, because every other student is like looking at him or looking at her or looking at the student, and they're trying to figure out when are they going to get the answer, right? But I want to encourage you to continue to use wait time, and also use questioning instead of giving away the answer. Question. So use questioning. So when the students are like, oh, well, I'm not sure. Is it 6? Is the answer 6? Instead of saying yes, you tell them, you say, well, how did you come up with that? Explain your reasoning. Tell me more. What do you notice? What do you wonder? So those are some things that you want to throw in there for your students to help them with processing and using that wait time. Now, tip 6, allow for creative expression. So when you're allowing for creative expression, you want the sky to be the limit. You don't want students to feel like they can't think outside of the box, like they can't explore beyond even the content on the text and take it. I can tell you this. The funnest lessons is when you are teaching some type of math, whatever the content, and you've assigned maybe 4 practice problems. And then I don't know about you, but have you ever gotten that whiff as a teacher where you're like, I guess it's like the grit kicks in and you just start creating problems from scratch that are relevant, but you switched it up. You switched up the game. And now you've created like 5 more problems, and it's the kids are getting it through that productive struggle, through that, practice, and that that conceptual understanding of the topic. You can really continue to build and stretch beyond the pages in the worksheet or in the textbook, the problems on the worksheet. You can go beyond that whenever you have your class's attention. It is so powerful. I really hope that you're having those moments where it's not just, I'm just sticking right to the, what's on the page in front of me. I'm not going to think outside of the box or challenge them with something that I'm coming up with like this. The thing I love about that too is like when you really start building, then those students can take that, and if you do it in a way that's accurate, what you'll find is sometimes it'll bleed into the next lesson. And students will say, oh, well, this, and then you're like, oh, well, we're going over that tomorrow. We're going over that in a couple of days. That is what you're wanting. They're thinking outside of the box. They're expanding that independent thinker that's within. The metacognition is flowing, and now they have graduated from that lesson, going into the lessons beyond, and they're motivated. They're intrinsically motivated about the math. That is learning, and I love that, and I hope that you guys are rocking it out with that. And so give them some time to be creative in their expression and in the expression of how they learn, and stretch their imagination as well. You want to also nurture their curiosity and engage in leadership with your students. And then, of course, provide feedback. Now, I want to go back to stretching their imagination and just working with them in general for creative expression. And I want to kind of flip this a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about technology, because I did find a clip that I wanted to share with you about engaging student voice through technology that I thought was pretty interesting, because it just provided a different way to do it. So let's listen.
Especially in light of just the deluge of these plastic devices in classes now, and their capacity to both inhibit and amplify student voice almost equally. And that's dependent on how people who build the technology answer the question, what are these things good for anyway? And so we've answered that question, and we say that these computers are good for new modes of creative mathematical expression, similar to how they've enabled expression of different sorts outside of the classroom. And then also new ways to connect students to each other and to teachers through their ideas in the same way that.
So I think it's very interesting that you can take technology in a way to spin it so that students are connected. Like Dan is saying here, you can connect the student through technology with their peers and also with their teachers. I think it's very interesting, because sometimes when you're using technology, it seems very surface level connection, but you're not really taking it beyond just, okay, grab your calculator, or okay, blah, blah, blah. But like he's saying here in this particular this particular resource, this is a good way that you can connect students. So let's keep listening.
That we connect with each other outside of the classroom in these new ways. What that results in for us, we measure our work based on how well it enables students to be right and wrong in different interesting ways. A lot of math ed tech, you can be right and wrong, and right in one way if you click the right multiple choice item, and wrong in like 3 different ways, but not very interesting ways. And so what we have here, for example, is students are trying to create a parabola that goes through these slaloms right here. And even in an abstract situation like this, there are different ways to be right and wrong, different creative mathematical expressions from students that then we build tools that allow teachers to, for instance, snapshot what students have done, these different ways of being right. Take these snapshots. If you're a student of the 5 practices for productive mathematical discussions, you'll recognize this kind of pedagogy. And teachers can then position these student voices, these contributions, and voice here means like an abstract equation is just a form of expression, and ask like, how are these the same? How are they different? And host conversations about mathematical expressions like that. We also create the ability for students to create challenges for each other. So after trying a few of these that we've created, we say to students, all right, you decide if you want to do 1, 2, 3, or 4 slalom gates, and you position them where you want to. And then after you've solved your own challenge, you and a partner, it goes into this class gallery where students.
I think that's pretty neat. But it's all about student voice here. I think the student voice has been amplified in these particular problems because the students are allowed opportunities to, here it says, make my challenge, and then they're able to see what's going on with their peers. Now, I want to jump a little bit to this other guy who's talking about
15 TAs,
what he does
I work with them in the
Morehouse
evenings
College
to train them how to work with their peers. What's resulted from that is me learning to be vulnerable and giving away my own voice in exchange for other student voices.
I think that's pretty powerful what he said. He said that he gives away his own voice for student voices in the classroom. And I want to say, I don't know if he gave away his voice. I think he more so facilitated it in that moment. And so as he's switching his role as being the main contributor to the lesson to more of a facilitator. So let's listen to what he has to say.
The image of them at our annual math fair. It happens at midterms and then fall. And so the students at the board right now are TAs. This is actually one of our seniors, Joshua Sparks. He's a math teacher now in Texas.
Awesome.
And he studied math education at Spelman and Morehouse. And he was sort of a leader in terms of this transition from teacher voice to student voice. And I think part of that for me and the learning for me was really listening to students. I think that's what I said about the power. I think we hear students, but really listening to what they need is something different.
I'm going to stop there. Did you hear what he said at the end? We listen, but, really hearing what they need. That is the key here. And that is what we have to start doing is when we are listening to them, not just listening to hear if it's correct, but to hear what else or what is missing in the response. So they gave a response, but are they giving the entire full response? Or is there something missing? Is there content missing? Do we have to help them buff up their responses? And that's going to come through maybe more clarity, maybe more teaching, so that conceptual understanding is heightened. So those are some things to consider when you're trying to strengthen student voice here. Going back to nurturing curiosity, that's going to be, I think, through your questioning, through your real world example problems, making sure that you're asking questions that can really help students to become curious and also connecting their purpose with it. And that helps them to be gritty about the content. That helps them to have a growth mindset about the topic to where they're not going to be like, oh, I don't want to do this, or oh, I just can't do it, or it's just another one of those type of problems, to where they actually expand their reasoning and say, no, I'm going to give this a stab. I'm going to check this out. And, I'm going to be a little bit gritty about this, and I'm going to be resilient, do what I need to do to figure this out, see how much I can understand on my own, and then partner up with my, my teammates and see what we all come up with, as a consensus to the problem that we're working on. So these are some things that you want to consider when you're trying to nurture curiosity. When you are able to nurture that curiosity, that grit level is going to grow. You're going to develop grit in your students. And then now tip 9, I mentioned this, engage in leadership. And my perspective on this is whenever you're engaging in leadership for students, you are giving them roles so that they feel empowered as students, and you allow that voice to be magnified or amplified in the classroom. So, if you do have, you've assigned roles, say Kagan roles, whatever, and you've got a student who is the timekeeper. You have a student who is the one that presents for the class, a student who makes sure that everybody is, on task, and then maybe someone that is writing out the work, checking with everybody, making sure that everybody's proficient. Okay, whatever your roles are, it's imperative that you empower that leadership so that students understand that you, as the educator, aren't responsible for every single thing that takes place in the class. Because guess what? When you are that teacher and you have not assigned roles and you not released control, you leave the class feeling burned out. And when it hits 12 o'clock, you are burned out because you're like, oh, I've had to do so much. I've had to do so much. I had to write the words for the vocab on the board. I had to write the agenda. I had to write out all the problems for the bell work. I had to, go through and make sure that not only was attendance taken, I had to make sure that, when I was writing the notes, that I wrote every single thing out. I had to make sure all their computers were set up. I had to put away all their laptops or their Chromebooks. I had to straighten up the classroom and, pushing all their chairs because they leave them a mess every time they leave my classroom. You're doing too much. You're doing too much. And I'm here to sound the alarm so that you can get a system in place so that you can utilize those awesome, awesome students that you have and strengthen student voice and leadership roles by contributing opportunities or allowing students to contribute to the environment. So why are you putting away, for instance, chairs and straightening desks when you didn't even make the mess? You should have a system in place where your students maybe understand that, they're sitting in teams or they're sitting in groups, and maybe there are incentives that you can put in place for the cleanest group at the end. Or, do you have a role of some student? Maybe you can assign a student that will write out the bell work problems for you, that will write out the agenda for you, that will write out the vocab, that will help you run errands when it comes down to printing a quiz if you have to do a quiz. Find out how you can delegate some of your responsibilities, those small tasks, to your babies or your students so that you don't have to do it all. So, and then of course, the last one is providing feedback. And I hope that you're able to provide effective and very positive feedback that is uplifting, because our role is to uplift our students, to love our students, and to help them to evolve, not only with proficiency in the topic, but as student learners as a whole. We are building the whole child. So with that said, I hope that you were able to get some type of tips here, some kind of encouragement with empowering student voice. And I would love to hear back from you. Don't be a stranger. Thanks so much for joining me again on the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. Again, this show will be featured on Swing Girl Media, hosted on Fire Stick. So tune in there to see it again, and also on social media platforms throughout. You can also check out my website, www.india-white.com, or for books, blogs, and to schedule me for your next speaking event. And then, of course, if you are wanting to be on this show, feel free to send me an email of your photo in your bio to india.white.123@gmail.com so that I can get you scheduled for the show. And thank you for those that are putting in your requests. And I also wanted to remind you to follow me on social media. My Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. So please, please, please follow me, and let's stay connected. Also, check out my website. I think I already told you guys that earlier, www.india-white.com. And then, of course, I'm looking forward to seeing some of you guys in a few days at these grit and numeracy workshops throughout California, which I will be posting on my social media. So look out for that. And then, of course, CMC Central Conference. Thank you to all of the leaders there. Appreciate the love, the support, and the opportunity. Looking forward to seeing friends, colleagues, and rock stars throughout the nation at this phenomenal conference in Bakersfield, California. So, and I am speaking, like I said, on March 9th at like 1:10 Pacific time. So please join my session. I will give you prizes and hugs, and we'll have a blast. So with that said, until next time, guys, stay gritty.